Likkutei Sichos Chelik Chabeis, Volume 22, the second Sikha of Parsha Kedoshim. This Sikha is a wonderful explanation in Rashi on chapter 19, verses 23 and 24, and it sheds light on the purpose / objective of the mitzvah of Orla and Netar Avoy. Just as an introduction to refamiliarize ourselves with several of the Klolei Rashi, the rules in Rashi, which will help us better appreciate the Sikha. Number one, Rashi, when stating his commentary, when presenting his explanation on the verse or on some of the words of the verse, Rashi always says it in the most short and sweet manner, meaning in the most concise and precise manner. When Rashi seems to be adding what otherwise seems like superfluous details or repeating himself almost, that in itself is very telling. It tells us that Rashi is trying to add some emphasis, Rashi is trying to highlight some things, Rashi is trying to bring out something deeper here, and that needs to be studied, that needs to be analyzed. Another rule in Rashi, typically Rashi will stick to the actual verbiage of the verse, of the psukim, when quoting the psukim or when referring to the pasuk. When Rashi seems to be deviating from there, that means Rashi is giving us extra emphasis or clarity or depth, and that again needs to be studied. Also, when Rashi quotes a saying in order to explain what the verse is talking about, typically Rashi does not mention the author of that saying. Rashi does not mention the sage to whom that saying is attributed, unless that in itself, meaning mentioning the sage's name, that in itself adds to the understanding, to the appreciation of the matter. Let's go into the Sikha. After the Torah describes in detail the din, the mitzvah of Orla, that's the first 3 years where it's forbidden fruit, and then the fourth year, Netar Avoy, that now the fruit can be eaten, but with very severe restrictions. It means only Yerushalayim. The pasuk continues and it says, "Uvashana hachamishis toichlu es period," and in the 5th year you should eat its fruits. Lahoisif lochem tvuasai, to increase for you its yields, its produce. Ani Hashem lekechem, I am Hashem your God. So Rashi on the Dibur HaMaschil, the heading Lahoisif lochem tvuasai, he says the following: HaMitzvah hazois tishmru, this mitzvah that you will keep, Tiya lahoisif lachem tevasei, will be to you to increase for you the produce, the yields. Shebischara, as a reward for it, ani mevorech lachem, I will bless to you, I meaning Hashem will bless for you, peiros hanetios, the fruits of the plantation, of the plantings. Then he continues and he says, Hoya Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva would say, that Dibra always would say, Dibra Torah keneged litzar. The Torah always speaks against, or I should say in contrast, to counter the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Shelo yomer Adam harei arba shonim mani mitztar b'chinam. That a person shouldn't say, well, look here, 4 years, I have all this tsar, all this discomfort, all this agony, chinam, for no reason. It seems to be, I'm working on the field, working on the trees. For 3 years I can't even eat it. Even in the 4th years I can only eat it with severe restrictions. Lefichach, says Rashi, therefore, Nemar, it says, Lahaisif lachem tvasei, Hashem is saying that this is in order to add for you, to increase for you in its produce. Now it's obvious that Rashi is coming to explain that the words in the pasuk, quote, Lahaisif lachem tvasei, to increase to you its yields, is not just a direct continuance of the words you should eat its fruit, period of the 5th years, but that to tell us that this is a reward of eating the fruits of the 5th years, but rather to tell us, Rashi is highlighting, is pointing out that this verse, this blessing of lahoisif lochem tvuasai, to add to you, its yield, that is actually going on the entirety of the inyan, on the entirety of the matter, that this whole mitzvah and its sum total is for this purpose. But the question is, why does Rashi go into such a lengthy pirush, in such a arichus haloshin, so much detail? He could have said it in just very short and sweet words. He could have just said, this goes on the entire matter, and that's it. In other words, to eliminate any idea, any thought from what it seems in the verse, that it's just a continuation of the very final thing that was said, that it's going on the 5th year and the eating the fruits of the 5th year, and therefore Rashi could just eliminate that by saying this goes on the entire subject and the entire matter. That's one question. Another question is, why does Rashi have to go into this lengthy explanation and say this mitzvah that you will keep will be in order to increase for you the yields, meaning that in its reward, and the reward of fulfilling this mitzvah, I am going to bless for you the peiros and atiyos, the fruits of the plantation. Why does Rashi have to go into this lengthy thing? He could have just said, this is going on the whole matter to tell you that everything will be blessed, or that I'm going to bless all the yields. Why go into this lengthy explanation, which seems to be going back and forth? Another few questions. Rashi doesn't say in reward of the mitzvah, which is obvious which mitzvah we're talking about. This is talking about the mitzvah which has just been discussed, the mitzvah of Arla, the mitzvah of Netarevoi. But rather, Rashi says, ha-mitzvah hazois, he emphasizes this mitzvah. What is he adding with this? Why do you have to say this mitzvah? This mitzvah as opposed to what? This mitzvah to counter what else? What other mitzvah? We're talking about this mitzvah. Another question is, Rashi says, that Hashem says, I promise you that I will increase peiros hanitiyos, the fruits of the plantation. Why did he deviate from the expression of the pasuk, which is tvuasai, its yields, which really seems to be meaning the same thing? Why does Rashi use a different expression? And then, of course, why does Rashi feel compelled to bring the saying of Rabbi Akiva? What exactly, or how exactly does this add to the understanding of this reward and of this mitzvah? And then, of course, why does Rashi have to mention Rabbi Akiva's name and say quoted in the name of Rabbi Akiva? Moreover, not just does he say Rabbi Akiva Omer, but he says Hoya Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva would say. Why is it important to know that he always would say this, as this is something that was common? Now, if we take a closer look at the actual saying of Rabbi Akiva, which Rashi quotes, there's also some questions that could be asked. You see, this is not the only mitzvah in the Torah, which the Torah gives us an understanding of what the reward will be. And the Torah tells us that this and this mitzvah yields such a reward. There are many mitzvahs in the Torah, or enough mitzvahs in the Torah that mention the reward. Over there, Rashi doesn't say anything about, quote, the Torah speaking against or in order to counter the Yetzer Hara. The Rashi doesn't say it. It's just, for whatever reason, the Torah decides to share with us the idea of the schar, of those particular mitzvahs. Why over here? Why did Rashi feel compelled over here to tell us that it's not just that the Torah is telling us a reward, but there's a specific purpose in countering the arguments of the Yetzer Hara? Now, if you look into the second Rashi of this pasuk, we also have some questions. What is the next Rashi in this very verse? It says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So Rashi quotes the words, Ani Hashem, I am God. And he says, what is Hashem telling us with this? We know that Hashem is God. Only by specific mitzvahs does Hashem point out that Ani Hashem or Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So Rashi says, what does it mean here? Quote, Ani Hashem hamaftiach al kach. I am Hashem who is promising you on this, v'nemon lishma avtachasi, and I am faithful, I can be relied upon to fulfill my promise. So of course the question is, whenever Rashi says, whenever it says in the pasuk Ani Hashem, Rashi typically explains just the words Nemon lishalem schar. I am faithful. It means I can be relied upon to pay the reward for it. Why over here does Rashi go into a lengthy explanation with the detail of I don't want to give you the promise and I can be relied upon to fulfill my promise? What's going on over here? It says that Rabbi, the explanation in all of this will answer all the questions together is as follows. The question in the pasuk which compelled Rashi to explain anything here in the first place is that the real expression in the pasuk should have been that leman hoisif lochem tvasei. It should have said that you do this mitzvah leman, in order to increase for you its yields. But rather, what does it say? Instead, what does it say? Le hoisif lochem, to add to you, which basically can be understood and which seems to be saying that you do this mitzvah to accomplish this. You do this mitzvah to add in the yield of your produce. You see, if it would have said, do this mitzvah, leman, in order for this to happen, so you say, do this mitzvah because you have to do this mitzvah, like you do any mitzvah. Any mitzvah we fulfill because Hashem said to do so. Hashem commanded us to do the mitzvah. Then the Torah tells us, leman, in order, this will bring to such and such a reward. But over here, the way it appears, it's almost like what we say on Shabbos. We say, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos lekatshoy. Remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy. That means this is the purpose of remembering Shabbos. That's the way it appears here in the pasuk. Do this mitzvah, lehoisif lachen tfosai, to increase in the yields. So it seems that it's not just an added thing. You're going to do the mitzvah because you do the mitzvah, and then the Torah tells us what the reward is, but rather the Torah is telling us that the purpose of doing this mitzvah is for this reward. That's why Rashi felt compelled to explain it in detail. And therefore he tells us, ha-mitzvah hazois. Now we understand why he says this mitzvah. This particular mitzvah is very unique. That you should keep it in order that it should be to you an increase in the produce. Meaning that although typically, as we mentioned, one should fulfill a mitzvah of Hashem because Hashem said so, but over here Hashem is telling you that the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah should be with this intention, should be for this purpose, to add, to increase for you in its yield. That means the Torah is not just informing us what the reward will be, but the Torah is telling us what our intention should be, what the purpose of the fulfillment of the mitzvah should be. And now we can appreciate why Rashi deviates from the expression, the verbiage of the verse, tvuasa, its yields, its produce, and says peiros hanetiyos, the fruits of the plantation. Because since the whole purpose of the mitzvah is, as we just said, is to increase the yield, for it to be blessed, if so, it should have said it in the beginning. If you think about it, when the Torah tells us how to do the mitzvah, what to do in the mitzvah, that the first 3 years you shouldn't eat from the fruit, and the 4th year you should only eat in Yerushalayim, there the Torah should have said, why does it wait all the way to the end? Why does it say the words Lahoisif Lechem Tvasei only after describing that in the 5th year it's already permissible and there is no longer any restrictions? This is because the Torah indicates the magnitude of the blessing. And the full magnitude of the blessing, the full appreciation of the entirety of the blessing is really not realized until after the fact, until after the 5th year. What is this blessing? This is what Rashi deviates, or seems to deviate. He says that it's going to be not only in the yield itself, that it's going to be a good yield. That's what the Torah seems to be saying. But rather Rashi adds, peiros hanetiyos, that the fruits of the plantation, even in the fruits itself, in already what grew, there also will be a tremendous blessing. Similar to the idea of what Rashi says in Parshas Bahar, where he says over there in regards to the blessing, Hashem says that Hashem says, I will bless your bread. What does it mean, I'll bless your bread? Rashi says that even in the intestines it will be blessed. That means the blessing will go so far, not only in the quantity of the yield, not only in the amount that you're going to be able to harvest, but that the harvest itself, the fruits itself, the produce itself will be blessed produce. This only comes at the end over here because that's when it's truly appreciated. When in later years, not only you have a great yield, but you also have a blessing in the fruit itself. Now, there's one question that remains. Okay, that's what this is all about. But why this mitzvah? What's so unique about this mitzvah that you have to fulfill it with this intention, with this purpose in mind, and that it has this extraordinary blessing at the end, as we just explained? Therefore, Rashi says, Rabbi Akiva says that the Torah speaks to counter the Yetzer Hara. And therefore, afterwards, he says, Ani Hashem, that I am trustworthy, I am faithful to fulfill my promise. In other words, because the Yetzer Hara has a very, very strong argument over here, the Yetzer Hara has a very, very strong and compelling complained, what is this 4 years working so hard, taking care of this new beautiful tree, and nothing, I get nothing from it. Therefore, Rashi has to bring this explanation and tell us why this mitzvah is so special, why this mitzvah is so unique, that Hashem singled it out to tell us this extraordinary reward, and that not only this is the reward of the mitzvah, but this is the purpose for which we have to do the mitzvah. But there still remains a question, especially for a seasoned Talmud. And you can say, one second. This challenge of the Yetzer Hara is obviously not for every single Jew. Many Jews can easily overcome the challenges of the Yetzer Hara. Obviously, this is just a minority of Jews. So does this make sense that the Torah gave us a mitzvah and tells us to fulfill the mitzvah with this kavanah, with this intent, only because a small minority of Jews that might be overwhelmed by their Yetzer Hara? This because of a couple of weak Jews? The answer, Rashi says, by bringing this saying in the name of Rabbi Akiva. This is why he says, Rabbi Akiva said. Rabbi Akiva is the one who said it. Why is it important to know that he is the author of this saying? Because Rabbi Akiva is the most famous for saying, that it's a great rule, an overwhelming rule in the Torah about loving your fellow Jew as yourself. And also, as the Gemara says, that Rabbi Akiva was rogel lizakis Yisrael. He constantly, always, at every opportunity, found merit with every single Jew. In other words, because this is in the name of Rabbi Akiva, it helps us understand why, even though this is just addressing the problem of a minority of Jews, a couple of weeks Jews that might be overwhelmed by the Yetzer Hara, but still, it explains why every single Jew now has to behave in this manner. Every single Jew has to be concerned about this, and therefore the Torah made it as a primary focus of this mitzvah, as the primary kavanah of this mitzvah, in order to take care of even those few Jews that are maybe not on the highest of levels, but v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. That this is, you have to find that Jew, and it should be on your level, it should be like you. And here's where Rashi adds the word Hoya Rabbi Akiva Eimer. Rabbi Akiva would say. Why is it important that he would say? Why is it not enough to say Rabbi Akiva said? What does it mean he would say? The answer is, the Rebbe explains in a wonderful idea here. The whole existence of Rabbi Akiva as Rabbi Akiva, the whole success of Rabbi Akiva in Torah is actually very similar, very parallel to this whole concept that we're dealing with here in this mitzvah. You see, what is this mitzvah? That in the first 4 years, in the beginning, it almost seems like everything is for naught. There isn't really anything there. And then you need the motivator. You need that promise of reward. And then you have that ultimate blessing. Rabbi Akiva had a very, very similar circumstance. The first 40 years of his life was empty. And then later he became motivated to learn Torah. How did he become motivated to learn Torah? What compelled him to go and learn Torah? So we know that he was promised, quote, a reward. What was the reward? That his wife, the daughter of this very, very rich man, she said to him, I will agree to marry you only on condition that you go learn Torah. So his initial motivation, his initial incentive was, quote, a reward. Later he became the great Rabbi Akiva to the extent so great that not only he was successful in Torah, but there was a blessing within his success. That, as we know, it says, "V'kulhu alibad Rabbi Akiva." All the great sages, when the Gemara enumerates Stam Mishnahs Rab Meir and Stam Sifros, Stam Toseftas Rabbi Yehuda, and so on, the Gemara concludes that all of them, being the students of Rabbi Akiva, v'chulu alibad Rabbi Akiva, they all go according to Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, Rashi adds, Hoya Rabbi Akiva. Because this is not just something Rabbi Akiva said, but this was his being. This is what he stood for because he experienced it. However, there's one final question that remains. On a deeper level, a more esoteric level, still, there's only a couple of Jews, a minority of Jews, that have a problem with the Yetzer Hara, that have a weakness, that perhaps that they may succumb to the arguments of the Yetzer Hara. Why is it that all Jews are compelled to perform this mitzvah in such a manner? Because the Torah lays out that this is the kavanah, this is the kavanah, this is how you have to do it. even if you're not on that low level. What is the idea over here? Why does it become a common practice for everyone? Says the Rebbe that really we have to understand these words. Dibur Torah keneged Yetzer Hara on a deeper level. Torah is speaking keneged, opposite to Yetzer Hara, is not to quash the Yetzer Hara, but rather to have the Yetzer Hara join in, have the Yetzer Hara elevated, so to speak. This is the idea what it says, V'rav tvuos b'koyach shor, which on a deeper level means that when do you have an increase in the yield? When you have the strength of the ox. That means you take the ox, which in itself has very wild and negative traits. In itself has very strong powers, but negative powers. But when you utilize it, when you channel it in the right manner, in the right direction, then you have an increase in yield. Likewise over here. By harnessing the Yetzer Hara, by getting the Yetzer Hara to get involved, to get on board, because you're promising him, you're telling him what he wants to hear. You're promising him all the good at the end. That is something that adds to the Kedusha, that adds, and therefore it intensifies the Kedusha. How does it happen? Why this mitzvah specifically? Because normally, in order to harness the Yetzer Hara, in order to subdue the Yetzer Hara, and then later harness it for good, it involves pain. It involves tsar. Even when the Yetzer Hara wants to go along, but it has to go against its own nature. It has to subdue itself. It has to submit itself. That in itself is inherently a tsar, that is pain. In this mitzvah, we have exactly that. That's iskafia, basically, in plain simple words. Iskafia. In this mitzvah, we have exactly that. That the first 4 years, even if you're doing it willingly, it still involves some pain. It involves the submissions of one will. It involves that one bends his own desire to see profit, his own desire to see benefit, and go along with the mitzvah and stay the course in order to reach that end result of the good that will be there. This is why this mitzvah is inherently the one where Dibra Torah keneged Yetzer Hara.